Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
I used to be a renegade. I used to fool around, but I couldn't take the punishment, and I had to settle down. And now I'm playing it real straight, and yes, I cut my hair. You might think I'm crazy, yes, I don't care, because that's how it's going on. It's hip to be square.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentleman Horror Month. This week I have with me a little fucking ugly bitch that I'm gonna stab to death and play with his blood, Connor Nielsen.
The hell, man?
I've got Steve Baxey, whose apartment is much nicer than mine and it overlooks Central Park. I've got Rasco Jackson, who's a fucking faggot. And then I have myself. And I just want to let you know about my morning routine, which is to do about 1,000 crunches. And if my face is a little puffy, I'll put an ice pack on it while I do them. And in that spirit, this week we're reviewing American Psycho, one of my favorite horror movies, though it's hard to classify it as that to some people. How's everybody doing?
Great. I love American Psycho.
Best opening to Geeky Gentleman ever? I think so.
Most memorable, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's surprising. Anyway, I love... Okay, so we're talking about American Psycho. American Psycho is easily one of the most quotable fucking movies ever made.
Yeah.
Like, anytime you need to awkwardly leave a room, I have to return some videotapes is such a go-to for me.
I cannot listen to Genesis or Phil Collins ever the same.
Yeah, I can't eat spray cheese because of the book.
Every time I go to an ATM, I'm just expecting it to say, "Feed me a stray cat."
Yeah.
I don't know how to use ATMs. This movie lied to me.
Okay, so I feel like the first place to go for this, since we're talking about it during Horror Month, is we'll go round robin here and ask, would you actually consider this a horror movie, or did I cheat? So I'll go first, and I'll say yes, I do think it's a horror movie. Connor?
Yes, although I'm going to make another comparison that you'll probably hate, Ian, but it reminds me a lot of like a David Lynch movie, where it is very difficult to categorize because it's doing a lot of different things at once, but I do think that the case for horror is there.
Okay.
It's also a dark comedy. It's also social commentary and all that sort of stuff.
Okay, Rasco?
Yeah, I think that it's... I don't think you're cheating. I think that it's also more than just horror, but I don't think it's cheating. Like, I wouldn't... Like, this is something that belongs on your shelf if you consider yourself a horror fan.
And Steve?
Insofar as you can construct the genre of horror, you could put American Psycho there, but American Psycho is not the thing I would use as an example of horror. In the same way, if you're going to talk about American Psycho, you don't want to leave out the fact that it's in the context of horror. So that's a really dodgy way of saying, I guess, but I'm not committed to it.
No, that's fair.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but I just look at the cover and it's got a guy holding a knife, so it says American Psycho, right? It's a horror movie, yeah?
Right.
Yeah?
Yeah, and nailing it down to any one genre, I think Connor made the best point. Nailing it down to any one genre is really hard. Like, is it a dark comedy? Sure, but there are scenes that aren't funny in the slightest. Like, even no matter how dark your sense of humor is, there are scenes in this that are just not funny. They're just... they're kind of hard to watch. Like, it's toward the end, but like the second time he gets the street walking prostitute into his limo, that's a really tense fucking scene, and it's not funny that she gets in the cab with them or anything, or limo with them. You like feel for her, and it is that moment of tension. It's like, you can imagine the stereotypical viewer going like, "No, bitch, don't get in the fucking car," like all that stuff. So I feel like that's a really intense scene that kind of belongs in a horror movie. So
the first time you see him kill, it's definitely a tonal shift that does not bring comedy to me.
yeah, like there's something about that scene that's like really darkly funny, and that he's like sitting there talking to a homeless man and giving the most like just cliche uppity advice you could possibly give. And so there's something like humorous about that, but like as far as the way the hobo is reacting, all that stuff, it's pretty freaking dark. So yeah, I do feel that this is fair to classify as a horror movie, if nothing else. So I'm glad about that. I'm glad no one's like sitting here and going, "Ian, this is not a horror movie." Besides in the comments, if you don't feel it's a horror movie, let me know why.
No, just shut up and don't speak your mind, please. We have better things to do with our time.
Why don't you go ahead and wash your vagina instead?
Yeah. And like, I guess the reason that I would definitely classify the movie as still being in the horror genre is because I would very easily classify the book as being in the horror genre. Again, I can't eat spray cheese because of the book. The book is one of the most like I remember the first time I read through a certain chapter of the book called Girl, which is like one of many. I like physically sweat while reading this chapter. I felt nauseous. I needed to put it's a short chapter.
Did you go blind?
No, I didn't go blind. It's a short chapter. It's only like a couple pages. In jokes. It's a short chapter. It's only a couple pages, but like, I felt sickened while reading that chapter of the book, and I feel the movie does a pretty good job of lining up with the book in a lot of ways. The funny thing is, the movie takes like 90%, I think, of its dialogue from the book, which is
as far as adaptations go, it's pretty literal, and a lot of the stuff it doesn't like take word for word. It does in a filmmaking way that almost works better. Mm-hmm. Like the way it opens with like the trail of red that you think is blood that turns into food. It's a really clever way to set the context in a way the book couldn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so, and I think that like a lot of the way that this movie is shot is really impressive, and I find a lot of things about it from like behind the scenes aspect really interesting. Like when the book came out, Bret Easton Elias got a lot of shit from like the feminist community saying it like promoted violence against women and stuff, and then so you have this movie which is the screenplay is co-written by two women and is directed by one of those women, and I think that they put it into a really, really great light of what the book was trying to say that people missed because they got caught up in the details of the violence. And so
I wouldn't say it's that they got caught up in the details of the violence. I think the movie just does a better job of explaining why the violence on the women is tragic and not glorification.
Fair.
Because the way the book is read, you're from this perspective so harshly there as compared to the movie that it almost has like an American History X style of like, oh yeah, this is the guy I want to be.
Fair. Okay. And I don't know, I find the approach that the movie takes to be really good, and I feel it does a better job of communicating the ideas of, I mean, here's the SJWE part, toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
In a really profound way. I mean, the book came out in 1991, the movie came out in 2000, and, they were like 10 to 15 years ahead of, like, internet culture catching on to a lot of this shit by highlighting it and how it was around in the 80s. Really fascinating to me.
Yeah, I agree. Especially when you put in that put it in that more sort of like capitalist context and how capitalism and patriarchy work together.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, so where should we go on this? Like, what is something that is worth talking about in specific, not just generally about the whole movie?
So,
Christian Bale.
yes, I was going to go there. Christian Bale is amazing. This might be my favorite performance from him.
It's definitely mine. He cracks me up in this movie.
Yeah.
Some of his line delivery is so perfect that my favorite line in the entire movie is, "Let's see Paul Allen's card." When he just asks to see his card. It's just such a... Let's see a Paul Allen's card.
The whole card scene is just amazing, and how he's just kind of like squirming in his chair and he starts sweating. It's fantastic. When he's losing his mind by the end, this is Christian Bale's one of those actors that like at some point realized that he was really famous and knew his reputation of being kind of method in a more interesting way as opposed to jackassery like Jared Leto. And so, like, Christian Bale performances sort of became Christian Bale performances in the same way Leonardo DiCaprio just kind of became Leonardo DiCaprio. It just happened to be good. This is one of those times where, like, it's early enough to where he's just putting himself into the character and his personality's coming through, and he gets really clever nuances to work with, and you're not just casting Christian Bale.
That's interesting. And, like, you know,
it's
funny you mentioned Jared Leto because, you know... It's great to see Batman kill the Joker.
Right, with a fucking axe. I love it.
Right.
Anyway. And not just that, kill the worst Joker, right?
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's why he's damaged, dude. Got shot right on the forehead.
Well, like
one thing I really like about Christian Bale's performance here is, like, it's almost like a restrained version of like Jim Carrey, like rubber face acting, where it's like him just looking at the card. It's like it's stoic to a comical degree. He's like,
"Oh my god, it's a lovely color, the perforated edges."
His eyes are doing all the acting, and like even early on, where he's just doing his aerobics and all that stuff, and like peeling the thing off of his face, like. It's like he's purposely being as stilted as he possibly can because it is all just an act, right?
I love how
if we're going into the dramaturgical element of just the character, not the performance, but the dramaturgy of the character. Are you guys familiar with dramaturgy at all?
No.
You guys know that? Okay.
Nope.
So some sociologists somewhere came up with the concept of dramaturgy, which is the idea of on-stage and off-stage behavior. And they're really, like, in his conclusion was there was never really such a thing as an off-stage behavior because you're always putting on some kind of performance no matter where you are, even when you're by yourself and you come under the assumption that maybe somebody might be watching you. What are you doing? And so I feel like Christian Bale's character, Patrick Bateman, always feels like he's being watched somehow. And even if, like, he's not being watched, he's always prepared. If somebody were to stumble upon him, then like he would like be there like in the middle of his performance. Like that's what I see like the beginning, his whole ridiculous morning routine is like. It is stilted to a comical degree almost.
I love how it's shot like a commercial for his life. It is. It's shot like a commercial for his life. It's so funny.
There's an idea of a Patrick Bateman.
God.
Well, like,
Great.
one thing I find really interesting about Christian Bale's performance is so much of it is, like, so much of this movie is inside Patrick Bateman's head, and so he has to do a lot of just physical acting to convey the right emotion that Patrick Bateman's feeling, because he can't just say it out loud. And so, like, I've seen people try to make, like, fake Batman trailers and use clips from American Psycho, because it's like, okay, it's Christian Bale in, like, you know, Wall Street clothes and all that stuff, so it fits for, like, a Bruce Wayne scene, and
he's
it never works. It always looks awkward as fuck, because, like, just physically his face looks so different when he's playing Patrick Bateman as opposed to Bruce Wayne. It's ridiculous. I think that Christian Bale did just a fantastic job. Like, he was so in character, but not in a dickhead way in this, that the people on set that worked with Christian Bale on this movie met him at the premiere, and they were like, why is Christian doing an English accent right now? Like, they didn't know that Christian Bale was actually, British. And it's just so fascinating that he got, like, that deep into the character, but in such a way that, like, he didn't become a destructive force on set. And that, I don't know, it's just, you can respect him for this.
Yeah, I'd say this is, like, up there in my top 3 Christian Bale performances. I really like him in American
Swing
Hustle.
Kids.
What's that?
Swing Kids.
Never seen it. I'm sorry. It's probably funny, but I don't know.
That was a joke for people that have seen Swing Kids then.
Okay. I've not seen Newsies. I'm sorry. But I think his performance in, like, American Hustle is really good. I mean, say what anyone will about that movie. I think his performance is excellent. But I think his performance in Dark Knight Rises is probably his best Batman performance. And then I also love this. So these 3 performances, I think, are like the holy trifecta of why Christian Bale is, like, in my top 5 favorite actors, like, ever. I love Christian Bale, and he's wonderful here. Like, this is a great entry point of, like, why should I like Christian Bale? Here's American Psycho.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fair. What's your favorite scene that he has in this, then?
Ooh.
Oh man, that's a good one. I mean,
tip to be square.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
To go against the grain, I might have
So
to go
catchy.
with the hooker scene. Like,
When he's pointing
that
at himself in the mirror and stuff. Yeah.
It's so funny. And he's talking about Genesis and how, like, when they got more easily to consume, they became more artistically pleasing because they were selling more. So that has to mean that they're better musicians because it was easier for a mass market appeal.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that whole sequence is so funny. And then it, like, climaxes, pardon the pun, with that, like, ludicrous sex scene. It is, like, I think that might be my favorite. Although the scene where he's killing Jared Leto is pretty great too.
Yeah. One of my favorite videos I ever found on YouTube was a clip from Batman Begins with with Bruce coming back from the Batmobile chase and, like, Alfred showing him on the news. They, like, they masked over the TV screen and put in the scene from American Psycho where he's filming the porno tape. And he's like, "What would you call that? Damn good television. It's a miracle no one was killed." That plays so well. No, like, there's so many great moments, and he is just all over the place in this movie. He is conveying so many, like, different wacky ass emotions. Like, he's cried his eyes out on the payphone and just having a complete mental breakdown, and then he's like, sitting there, like, internally screaming about business cards, and then he's externally screaming in rage as, like, try getting a reservation at Dorsia now, you fuck. Dorsia is, like, the epitome of his failures in the community, and I love it to death.
It's great when, like, he's having a conversation and then he'll, like, turn to walk away and he'll, like, break his character of, like, a nice guy, like, before he's fully turned away. Like, there's a few times where he'll talk to somebody and then he'll be like, "Thank you a lot," and then he'll, like, turn away and he'll, like, scowl before he's fully turned away, just like he's, like, getting lazy with it. Like, he does this so much, he's just like, all right, back to my normal pissed off, just normalness.
Yeah, and it's because
really
he's becoming just so fucking unraveled the way he portrays this character. Like, people will tend to say that this movie doesn't really have a plot, and the book doesn't either. It's just kind of all over the place. This has a slightly better plot as far as just a sequence of events goes, but Patrick Bateman definitely has a character arc here. He definitely goes through just this complete destabilization for someone who is clearly on rocky ground to start with. And that's really, really fascinating to watch Bale portray.
Yeah.
Man. I don't know. How do you guys feel? Because, like, the book is incredibly graphic in its descriptions of the violence. So how do you guys feel about the, like, relatively lack of direct violence seen on screen for this movie?
I don't know. So there's a point of like cinematic progression in history in terms of like what you see in horror movies, what you see in more mainstream movies, that there's like pieces missing from my memory of like, or like in my recollection, because I'm not familiar with 90s films and 2000s films. Those are like the two decades where I just haven't watched a lot of movies from then. So,
dude, this is post Tarantino.
I'm aware of that, but just because Tarantino was doing doesn't mean it was necessarily everywhere all at once. So,
I mean, no, this is post Tarantino. This is post Natural Born Killers. This is like past the slasher flicks of the 80s.
Yeah, I know, but this is still presenting itself in a way that's less Grindhouse inspired.
Mm-hmm.
And so it has a sheen of a more like traditional drama almost. And so that being said, so it's like I don't know other movies released in 2000, like what was uber violent, what was it? So to me, it just sort of felt like it was a thing of its time. I could be very much off the ball, but it seemed like I got the message, and I think that the implications are maybe a little bit more frightening than what they could have shown, but at the same time, there's plenty of ways you can use the film form to disturb by seeing.
Okay. How about you, Steve?
Yeah,
you've read the book too.
Yeah, the violence in the book is, particularly if you like read a lot of horror fiction. Horror fiction, in the same way romantic stories do, have a kind of, they fall into one of two categories, where like it's either the book is building up and describing the scene almost too much, as if it wants the scene itself and the goriness of it to be the shock value as opposed to the context it's in, or it wants to be like the more Stephen King side of it, where like everything around the scene is what's making you afraid, so what you actually see doesn't actually have to be that scary. And American Psycho, the book, is somewhere in that middle ground where like the exposition is constantly bashing you over the head, and it's because of that, and because the exposition is the context, that the things you see start getting scarier and more violent. And because the movie doesn't have the same sort of like constantly berating you about what's happening in like 10 pages of hair care products and stuff like that, the violence doesn't carry that same sort of like, it doesn't have that same sort of like catharsis in the way that it does in the book. But it works in a weird way, because when this movie came out, the soundtrack for it was like the controversial film. People thought it was like hyper violent and stuff like that. And the way it is now, I feel like it's almost really restrained and really artsy in its violence, as opposed to in any way glorifying. Like in a world where Game of Thrones and Walking Dead are the two biggest TV shows on television, I just don't see this as a violent movie. Like it's so hard for me to see this as like, this is the movie that thinks violence is artsy and fun and expressionist. It is not a violent movie.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I think that like the violence in the book is the thing that makes it just like really, really expressly hard to get through. I don't feel like the book glorifies the violence so much as it tries to like legitimately sicken you with it. And that's why we go into such detail of like, I shoved a live rat up a woman's pussy and then cut her in half with a chainsaw before cooking her femur in the oven and eating bits of it. I'm like, Jesus fuck, that is never leaving my brain. And it's described with the same casualty of Van Patten is wearing leather shoes with a, Armani suit today, and it clearly looks better than mine. And so to not see that happen in the movie, to see like, we only get one major scene of intense violence. Like, even when he goes on his fucking action movie spree, it's like, we see like the one lady get shot, but there's not that much blood. We see the cops get shot at, but they just fall down. There's not like a lot of like just the gruesome, intense detail that you get in the book.
So what you're saying is you would have been more okay if like Eli Roth made this, right?
I mean, you know, like
I'm mostly being facetious. I'm
honestly, if
mostly
we were to adapt every scene from the book, Hostel would look like a fucking kids film.
Honestly, though. Yeah.
Yeah, like that is the level of intense, just absolutely disgusting description of violence you get in that book, and it's meant to be. And like I don't feel it's glorified because I feel like it wants to make you uncomfortable with it, and so I'm a little torn on the presentation of it in this movie because it certainly gets across the point of like how absurd and disturbing the things Patrick Bateman is doing are, but at the same time, it's got this like hands-off approach of not wanting to show it. And I'm like, I feel like you kind of undercut the point of the violence when you shy away from it like that.
See, I don't think it undercuts. I think the distinction here is the book, like you said, wants to make you uncomfortable. I think the movie wants to alienate you. I think part of what makes it as a movie really interesting is that movies are constructed in a way that they respond to empathy, a person's empathy more directly. And so in a lot of horror movies, the best way to do is to like give you familiar trappings that attract empathetic responses and to distort them. Like part of why Michael Myers is scary is that his face is clear, he's clearly humanoid, but the expression is entirely blank. And so you see something, but you can't latch on to anything. And so in this movie, it's the same sort of logic here where everything's there. The entire like dynamic of the social world that you engage in every day is there, but it's not rooted in anything you can empathize with at all. And so the violence, when it's supposed to be shocking, is more alienating because it's you're completely at a distance from the world, and that's the disturbing thing you're meant to analyze, is that almost kind of like Philip K. Dickish, where like the whole point of it is that like you're not so much human as you are programmed responses to these things that make you terrible. Whereas the book is more like, I'm going to shock you to your senses.
Mm-hmm. And I guess the thing with that is the movie does a really good job of showing you just like every fucking restaurant, every detail of his goddamn apartment, all these like the lifestyle things. And the point of that in the book, to a certain degree, is to compare it to the barbarism, the savagery of the murders. And so I feel like there's an imbalance created by not showing as much of the barbarism in the film, but showing all the excessiveness of the lifestyle.
And I think that just might be... because in a book, portraying like harsh violence is a much more... not necessarily like it's not a bad thing to do. It's just like it's a harder to do, and so you're playing against your form, and you have to be like a real expert writer to give you visual stimulation of violence in a way that a book doesn't naturally allow for. And it's the opposite in a movie. Mm-hmm. So I feel like it's I don't know if it's unbalanced so much as it's just the movie's playing to the strength of, we can show you the beating over the head descriptions of hair care products and apartments and superficiality in a way the book couldn't. So we'll undercut the violence, whereas the book is going to revel in the hair care products and stuff in a way they can describe, and the violence is the thing that they can exaggerate because that's harder for them.
Okay, Rasco, what are your thoughts on this? I'm curious.
To be completely honest, I'm getting lost in this debate about violence.
How did you feel about the portrayal of violence in the film?
I kind of agree that the violence is a lot more like whimsical and it's very, I don't want to use this word, but it is kind of fun. And what's fun about it is not that like anything that you're like seeing is actually like something you like to see. It's more so that it plays it with like a zero impact factor. Mm-hmm. Like there's no, this is blood with like some sort of like weird violin string noise to like emphasize it. It's more so just kind of very matter of fact about it. And I feel like a scene that kind of like is the same way so when Christian Bale is running down the hallway with the chainsaw and he's covered in blood, for example, that scene is really matter of fact. That's not like really scary as much as it is like, this is what he's doing right now. this is what he's into. And I feel like the violence is handled the same way, where it's kind of just like, this is just the violence. This is just a part of his life. And there's not, and I don't want it to try to beat me over the head with how graphic it is. And it's not very graphic to begin with, based on what we actually see in the movie.
Okay. And I don't know, it's one of those things, like, the violence is such a big part of the book that when I look at it in the film, I'm like, I feel that there is something lost in that translation, and I don't know how other people feel about that. So,
okay. So that's an interesting point you're making, because, like, so I'll be honest. A lot of this, I watched it for the first time for this review, and I wouldn't say I was disappointed. I like this movie. But the process of watching it felt obligatory, because I feel like I've seen this movie without ever actually seeing it. It was the same experience I had watching Carrie for the first time. It was the same experience I had watching Halloween for the first time, where, yep, I knew this would happen. I've seen this clip before. I've heard people review this and analyze this movie up a gutter. This is what this is about. This is what all this means. Yep, this is the part where this happens. Check. Seen it. Check it off the list. Sayonara. See you next, if I ever get around to watching you again, maybe I'll like you a little bit more. The actual process of watching it was not fun for me. So I guess when it comes to the violence, I was just more, yep, that's what it's like in this movie, and I wasn't much paying attention to what it meant.
okay.
And I mean, it's interesting to take that perspective and kind of like go into sort of how influential this movie is, despite it not being talked about quite as much as it used to be. I feel like there was this point in like the mid 2000s where literature on American Psycho was almost at a surplus, and now it's sort of faded away. But like, as much as stuff like the original Wall Street and stuff like that influences things like Wolf of Wall Street, the kind of performance DiCaprio is giving in that movie is entirely American Psycho. There's a lot of like more contemporary horror movies, a lot of like artsier social commentaries and stuff like that are so rooted in this movie that I can sort of see where, like, yeah, you've seen this scene 1,000 times. The scene with the business cards is probably one of the most iconic scenes of the 21st century of film, honestly.
I love the sound design in that scene, because, like, when they take the cards out of the little holders, yeah, it's like, I think it's like swords being drawn out of sheaths and stuff. It's so awesome.
Oh, yeah, it's great.
Okay, let's talk about the other big thing that I hear brought up about this movie, and we'll go round robin again. Did any of this shit happen?
Oh, God.
I mean, someone thought it happened, which is the same thing as it's happened.
See, I don't think that's how that works, Steve.
No, okay. So when it comes to film, that is how that works. When it comes to reality, that's an entirely different question. We won't have to go into that. But when it comes to film, if we saw this happen from the perspective of someone who thought it happened, then it happened.
Okay, no, that's fair, but I'm like, we're talking like the objective sense of like, for other characters in the universe, did Patrick Bateman actually run down the street shooting cop cars and making a huge explosion happen?
As far as this film is concerned, there are no other characters that perceive. There is only Patrick Bateman. So resting on them as objective reality doesn't help your case. Because ultimately the way this movie's made is that the only person that matters is Patrick Bateman. And so if it happened for Patrick Bateman, it happened.
Yeah, but like, he's left in this place where he's like, he doesn't know if it's happened at the end of it, right? Like,
sure,
he
experienced. He came to doubt what he thought was already happening. He took what was happening for granted. That still means for him on some level it happened.
Okay, but for you, did it happen, is my question.
Yes.
Okay, because like, this is a thing people get like really on about this. So, Rasco, did you, as this movie ended, before Steve said what he said, did this happen or did this not happen?
I've never really swayed on this. I've always kind of felt like it happened every time I've ever seen this. From the first time, I've seen this movie like 3 times. Mm-hmm. And I've always just... And I don't really have a great argument for why. I just always kind of go with the notion that it all happened.
Connor, this is your first time watching this film. All the shit that Patrick Bateman did that's really fucked up, did it happen? Or is he just, like, fucked in the head?
Okay, so I don't care. I mean, that's probably maybe a little bit more.
I second that. I don't really care, but
this kind of is the same thing from like going to Blade Runner. If you've not seen the first Blade Runner, I guess spoilers. Sorry, but it's the question of is Rick Deckard a replicant or isn't he? And I'm always kind of the opinion of I don't think it really matters. I like to think he's not because then the conversation can at least get away from is he a replicant or isn't he? Like, look at all the stuff this movie's doing, and all we want to do is boil it down to is he a replicant or isn't he? That's the debate, and that's frustrating to me. So when it comes to this movie, it's like, look at all the stuff this movie's saying. Look at what it means, and the social commentary and the male gaze element and all that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. And then you want to boil it down to, well, did it happen or not? And it's like, I don't really care. I don't think it ultimately matters. You know what? The bear from The Revenant imagined it all. Sure, why not?
Okay.
I don't think it matters.
No, that's fair. It's a question people bring up about this, and it is like a really unsettling and vague ending with like all these things like, I had dinner with Paul Allen in London 2 days ago, and like all the fact that the cops never show up, the fact that like he goes back to the apartment and the realtor lady's there. And it's meant to confuse the fuck out of Patrick Bateman, but it left a lot of people wondering, well, did any of that shit happen or not? Because the directors come out and said, no, as far as I'm concerned, it all did. I just apparently made it too vague. And I don't really care what the director says. I care more about what people think about how they react to it. Because
that's entirely fair. I get why you're asking it.
No, I'm just always been of the opinion that it clearly did. It's just part of the commentary of the whole Wall Street thing of these guys can get away with anything. Like that's
and I mean I can sympathize with why Connor in particular you'd be like frustrated with like the conversation being like forced down that one perspective of his Deckard replicant. Did this all really happen? Just on principle, though, I feel like something that needs to be addressed is in any general sense, for anything artistic, for anything philosophical, an answer to one question implies an answer to every question. Mm-hmm. And so if Deckard is a replicant, that isn't one aspect of the film that everything gets boiled down to. That is something that then translates and colors the interpretation of the entire film and everything that it's saying. In the same way, if this all happened, the social commentary, the genre bending, all of it means something systematically that wouldn't be the case if it didn't happen.
Yeah.
Okay, that's entirely understandable. And by the way, I watched Blade Runner with my brother for the first time the other night. I've seen it before, but he hadn't. And I don't think Deckard's a replicant, and he does. So we've had some interesting debates about it, which is interesting.
Yeah, and everyone wants to talk Blade Runner tonight. It's funny.
It's so good.
I'm sorry.
No, it's
so good.
No, but like the idea of whether or not it all happened, I tend to agree. Yeah, it's like that's probably the least interesting thing about the movie to me, but it is something I see people bring up all the time, and I'm like, I think it adds to the commentary if it did, because then he shot cops, he killed a woman on the street, he did all these things in addition to all these murders of people that like are just as bad as him, or that society tells us we shouldn't care about, like prostitutes and models and everything, these disposable people, the homeless. He's going around murdering them throughout the whole movie. Like I find it interesting from a classist perspective to look at who Patrick Bateman is murdering, and it's like prostitutes, homeless people, rival businessmen. And it's like these people don't matter as far as like his echelon of society is concerned. Like the prostitutes, the homeless don't matter. A rival businessman, you're supposed to conquer and defeat them, and so it's all like from that perspective really interesting. And so then when he goes off on his killing spree and just has to kill a lot of people at the end of the movie, it's like it's so ludicrous. Security guard, bam, right in the head. Janitor coming out of the elevator, he takes the trip around the fucking revolving door to shoot him again.
Which, by the way, I am a janitor, and I'm like, oh, god damn it.
Well, don't go out the fucking elevator at the wrong time, Connor. God damn it.
I'll try not to.
Connor's gonna have like one of those moments where he's like, taking the elevator up building at one point, and it opens, and then there's like a couple having sex right in front of the elevator. He just has to stand there awkwardly looking at them with his mop in his hand, and they're like, "You want in?" And he's like, "No, I'm a beta male cuck."
I'll say, can you please keep it to one place so I only have to clean up that location?
No, but like I find the classism of Patrick Bateman's murder victims very, very fascinating. Like the closer the more dangerous this gets is the closer he gets to murdering people of his ilk, right? And that's fascinating. Like when he's spiraling out of control, it's when he murders, a model. It's when when he plans to murder his secretary. It's after he murders his rival, who people perceive as better than him. Then there's also the anonymity, the interchangeability of all these characters. Like the fact that Paul Allen mistakes Patrick for one character, and other people mistake Patrick for that same character. And just left, and at the end of the movie, after he's confessed to his lawyer, he goes straight up to the guy, and he's like, "No, I'm Patrick Bateman. I killed people." And the guy thinks it's a fucking joke. I find all that stuff really, really interesting about what the movie has to say, and the context of, okay, so did it actually happen, whatever the fuck that's supposed to mean, colors that debate.
Because then it gets more in line with if it happened for Patrick Bateman, then who Patrick Bateman is and what counts as real counts from the perspective of what his power allows him to do and what his identity allows him to do, and that's really fascinating. It again goes to that whole alienation thing of like, ultimately the biggest tragedy for him, despite him being an awful person, if he actually did all of these things, is that on some level he realizes that in order for him to do any of this at all, he has to at some point be the victim of it too. And that's terrifying, and that sort of breaks his reality.
Mm-hmm. What do you guys think about his fucking speeches on music?
I love that they sound like reviews that he's read and internalized because he can't actually express himself through art.
Mm-hmm.
I like it. So I used to really be into music when I was in middle school and early high school, and I was that hipster guy who was like, "Oh no, man, none of the hits are actually good. It's all about the deep cuts." And to a degree, I'm still that guy because I've always felt like the hits and the songs that everyone's heard of, they're the easiest to digest. They're the ones that have a bigger mass appeal. Like take for example. A Night at the Opera by Queen. I think that's the greatest album ever conceived by a human. I think it's all downhill from an artistic standpoint when it comes to music since 1970, whatever. But everyone always wants to talk about Bohemian Rhapsody, and maybe it's because I've heard that song way too many times in my life to actually care about that song anymore. And I've been told that it's the greatest song ever made, and I just don't believe it. But you never hear anyone talk about 39 from that album. You never hear anybody talk about the Prophet song, which is the best Queen song. You never hear anybody talk about Death on Two Legs. Like it's like I think those are like powerful, strong songs. But in a lot of ways, I see Bohemian Rhapsody as the easy version of the Prophet song. I see I'm in Love with My Car as the easy version of like Death on Two Legs. And so it's just I like that his long monologues about music are talking about. You're right, Steve. When you talk about they're just very surface level reviews almost of this is good because people like.
Yeah.
So listen.
No, and like the thing I find interesting about those scenes where he's reviewing music, the Paul Allen scene excluded for right now, is it reeks so much of this idea of a Patrick Bateman thing that he talks about. Like I think those two scenes with the prostitutes and him talking about music are the go-to scenes for me, wherein like there is an idea of Patrick Bateman, but there's no real person because he has this fantasy of like someone in his social class should be able to pick up two women, take them back to his luxury apartment, play some music, and be able to talk really deeply about it in order to turn them on and inspire a threesome. So he engineers this whole situation where these women can't possibly leave, and does it all to like boost his own ego. And then he tries it again, and this time he shores it up by one of them being a prostitute and the other one he drugs. And so like he just does so much to try to like make himself fit the role that he sees that he's supposed to have. And it does this really, fascinating thing where it's like, oh man, it's so fake. It is so incredibly fake. Like, he doesn't have any opinion on this music. Like, no one in their right fucking mind can say anything intelligent about Hip to Be Square beyond it's a catchy song.
I think that, like, I've always said that, like, if I ever got myself, like, and I've never seen this movie, so I couldn't compare it, but if I ever find myself in a situation like that, I would rather kill myself than ever have that happen to me, where I'm so alienating and awkward and weird that I have to engineer this situation instead of have it happen organically. Mm-hmm. It is so fake, and it's like humorous, but like in an embarrassing way. And that whole scene, you expertly explained it. I like that.
Thank you. Like, I've thought about this movie a lot. I did a whole pitch on it in high school at one point for making it as a stage play. It's been converted to a Broadway musical, I know, at one point, I think in London. With the second scene, though, where he's talking about Whitney Houston, I love the fact that the one chick that he's not paying to be there just starts laughing in his face. And she's like, "You listen to Whitney Houston?" And he's like, so he can't even take himself out of describing it. He's just like, oh, it doesn't matter. I'm going to kill her later anyway, so I'm going to finish my detailed thoughts on Whitney fucking Houston. And his that image of masculinity is just so fragile in that moment that it's perfect to me. I love it to death. I'm pretty sure. I'm trying to remember. I'm pretty sure that's the co-writer of the screenplay, playing that actress.
Oh, that's cool.
Character. Because I remember I listened to a commentary from both the director and the screenplay co-writer, and she talks about, I was in this, and like they made me lay naked, covered in fake blood for like a good 2 hours while they were shooting that scene in the bathroom, and then at the end of the day, I'm only in it for like half a second. It was kind of a waste. So there's those two scenes, and then there's the really famous Paul Allen, Jared Leto scene with Hip to Be Square. If you haven't seen it, it's a real treat. Go watch Weird Al and Huey Lewis do a parody of that scene. It's kind of the best thing ever.
I love that. I've seen that. It's really funny.
Yeah. But like the Paul Allen scene is a similar thing where he's like trying to impress Paul Allen by talking about like, oh, see, this is how high society I am with my deep insights on Huey Lewis in the News. But what he's saying about Huey Lewis in the News says more about Patrick Bateman, where he's like, it's about the pleasures of conformity. It's not. It's so not. But, like, that's what he wants it to be about. That's what he wants himself to be. Like, to be able to enjoy himself fitting in and not feel like he's, terribly suffering and not living up to it. And, like, I love that that's so affirmed for him in the things people say about Patrick Bateman when they don't actually know that they're talking to Patrick Bateman. It's like, Patrick Bateman, oh, what a fucking whiny loser. Like, he could kill a bunch of people. I don't know. I have a lot to say on this movie. I feel like I'm taking up too much of the conversation.
No, you're good. I mean, you've got the most perspective on it.
It's someone else say something though. I don't care what. Someone sing "Hip to Be Square."
So,
Hip to Be Square.
My one thing about this movie that I think puts it over the top with Christian Bale's acting is the worst nitpick ever. But it's a thing that's bothered me in every movie he's ever fucking made except this one. And that's for whatever godforsaken reason. every time someone tailors a suit for this man, it's always one size too big.
Yeah.
His suits in the Dark Knight trilogy are garbage, and no self-respecting tailor would let him walk out the door with a suit like that, and it bothers me. The ends of his blazer hang like 4 inches off of his butt at the beginning of Batman Begins, and that's awful. But in this movie, they're tailor-made and they're perfect.
Mm-hmm.
So Reese Witherspoon's in this movie. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Was this pre-Legally Blonde Reese Witherspoon?
Yes.
When was Legally
Weird to
Blonde?
think
Okay.
about.
So that's like, I think she blew up because of Legally Blonde, right? That was the thing that really put her on the map in terms of like leading and like being in stuff like Walk the Line and being an Oscar nominated. You could
Wasn't she in
trace that
Chasing
back.
Amy, or am I thinking of someone else?
No,
I think
it
it might
wasn't
have
Chasing
been
Amy.
Oh.
Was it Chasing Amy?
I think it was. Okay, that's weird because she was sort of like the it girl, late 90s, early 2000s it girl. And then she's just sort of like a background peripheral character in this movie. That's kind of funny.
Yeah, she's got the fucking pig. Like, oh my god, that's
She
stupid
does.
pig. I love the scene where he tries to break up with her, and she's like, "No, it just wouldn't work. We have the same friends." Yeah, I've thought about that, and you can keep them. I'm like, shit. Attachments. No, but you're right. Reese Witherspoon's here. Jared Leto's here. Haley was watching this. She's never seen it. She was watching it with me, and Jared Leto's name came up at the beginning. She's like, "Oh, really?" So, like, this was one of his earlier movies.
Yeah, this and
Looks
Panic
so
Room,
young.
I think, came out around the same time.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. I was making fun of Jared Leto being cast as Hugh Hefner the other day on Twitter, and I was like, "Hey, here's an idea. How about we cast Jared Leto as someone having to deal with a coworker who is acting ridiculously inappropriately, and they just have to put up with it?" And someone was a smart ass, and they're like, "Oh, maybe like Paul Allen's character in American Psycho." I'm like, fair point, but he didn't seem to learn his lesson, did he?
I'm just going to say, for the record, that Jared Leto starring as Hugh Hefner in a Brett Ratner biopic is the most disgusting sentence to ever come out of anyone's mouth.
Wait, that's real?
Yes.
That's
Fuck
almost
humanity.
That's almost as bad as a Death Wish remake starring Bruce Willis, directed by Eli Roth. Only I think that's
Oh my god, that's going to be so bad. Death Wish as a book is really interesting. That movie is the most awful right-wing trash.
Wait, the original movie or the remake?
The original and the remake. Somehow they made the remake more fascist than the original movie.
See, I really like the original movie. I think it's really interesting.
I think it's awful. But we'll talk about that at some other point, I guess.
Yeah, fair
That's
enough.
not technically a horror movie.
No,
Brett
no.
Ratner is making a Hugh Hefner biopic.
That's the kind of man that would idolize Hugh Hefner.
Fair enough.
What on earth is happening? What?
It's funny to go back to this movie because of all the references to Trump nowadays, and you know,
Oh god, yes.
unbeknownst to most people, there is an American Psycho 2. It's garbage. It's got William Shatner and Jackie from That 70s Show in it.
Oh my god.
Mila Kunis?
Yeah, that's her. It's
I like the
abs-
tagline though.
Yeah, it's absolute trash. I would posit that we should make American Psycho 2 and Patrick Bateman becomes president. I feel like that is a thing that should happen. Just throw that one out there for you.
If
Write a
you guys are
fanfic about it.
unaware of the tagline for American Psycho 2, it's angrier, deadlier, sexier. American Psycho 2, starring Mila Kunis.
See, that should not be a bad tagline for this kind of movie.
It shouldn't.
But-
It shouldn't, but it
Yeah.
sucks.
Yeah, no, it does. It totally does. But
Fair enough. I don't know. Like, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go. You go.
Sorry, I was gonna say that apparently even Mila Kunis says it's an embarrassing movie. So
Oh, it's garbage. It is everything that this movie could have been, but is brilliant because it's not. Let me put it
It's
that
like The
way.
Fly too, pretty much.
I would say The Fly 2 is probably a better movie than American Psycho 2. It's pretty sad.
But what about The Rage: Carrie 2?
I mean, horror movies have always kind of had bad sequels, right? Like,
Yeah, they have, yeah.
it seems like horror movies and pornos get about 1 billion sequels, and they only drop in quality. I love the fact that Patrick Bateman just watches either porn or horror movies just while he's in his apartment alone. It's kind of amazing.
It does definitely fit into more of that really frail masculinity of there's only 2 things you can do: watch violence against women and watch violence against women.
Yep. I like the scene where he follows, what's his name, Lewis into the bathroom.
Oh yeah.
To strangle him to death, and then as he turns and is confronted by homosexuality, he is so shocked that he doesn't even have the ability to commit murder anymore. He just needs to, like, quickly remove himself from that situation in any possible way. But at the same time, he can't break, like, his social construct of himself. So he's got to, like, make an excuse for being in there, which is to wash his gloved hands. And then make an excuse to leave, which is, I have to return some videotapes.
His reaction to that's all like, oh no, it's so funny.
Just the act of being perceived as homosexual, even from the guy that he was about to kill, sickens him to his core, and it's hysterical.
He gets erectile dysfunction for killing.
Yeah.
It's really funny.
Yeah. I don't know. Rasco, you've been kind of quiet in this one. Why don't you take us somewhere?
What to talk about? Did anybody notice the boom mic arm that you can see in the mirror in one shot?
No.
No.
Well, that's a thing.
Okay. Anyone want to save Rasco here?
So Rasco, what do you think of Christian Bale's feet? I don't know.
You guys are
His
bad at
feet?
this.
I'm very bad
This
at
is
this.
harder than you guys give me credit for. Like, taking us on topics of conversation is difficult. I wish I just had everything, like, pre-written out in my head for exactly what I was going to say, analyzing every single piece ever, and then I could, like, drug you, and I could be like, Connor, dance. Rasco, bend over so he can see your asshole.
Whoa.
So I guess, like, there's one thing about American Psycho is the whole masculine examination that it's doing. I think it does it, and it's not subtle about it. It doesn't need to be subtle about it, and it's rather obvious, but that's not a bad thing. And I think that subtlety is a trait that is admirable in films, and I would recommend people use it. But if it's not there, that doesn't inherently mean it's wrong. And I think that from a tonal place, this movie goes through a lot of jarring tonal shifts as well. And I think this is something that a regular viewer would have a hard time digesting because it is in your face and not being subtle. And from a tonal place, it is very jarring. So I get why this has been more of a cult classic, from the mid-2000s on.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking to that, what do you guys think of the title? Because I think it's really interesting that this is American Psycho.
I'm so over the word American being the top word in a title that it completely glazes over me.
To be fair, this did it way before most of the
You
stuff
are
that we see now.
entirely true.
Like, this did it almost 2 decades before. But yeah, so... but, like, I like the fact that it's American Psycho in particular relation to that, because the notion here is the idea of masculinity that it's examining is inherently an American one, and that the kinds of domination, the kinds of violence, and the kinds of behavior Patrick Bateman incites in are things that are privilegedly American. Mm-hmm. And I think it's the sort of, like, there has been no catharsis thing at the end is a really interesting statement about America, about the whole notion of like, yeah, it doesn't matter how horrible and how much you fuck up, there is no catharsis, there is no repercussion for your action. You are in a perpetual loop of self-examined toxic masculinity, and masculinity is, if nothing else, to tell a story about domination.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting the way American plays in with just the absolute lavish luxury lifestyle, and how Patrick feels like a failure because he can't get a fucking reservation at Dorsia. Like, he has to take his drugged out mistress to a fake restaurant, or to a different restaurant, and tell her it's Dorsia. When he's trying to impress Paul Allen, what restaurant does he take him to? It's like this cheeky fucking Western-themed restaurant that, like, clearly isn't up to the right standards, and so what they both do is just yell at the wait staff. So just, like, all the excess, the luxury is such a big part of the character here, and is very particularly American.
And and speaking to Connor's point of like using the word American in titles for most things, most of the time when we do it, it's sort of a either glorification of the American way or like a sort of half-hearted critique where like we know we're bad but still kind of thing. And with the way this plays, it's not that at all. It is completely unabashedly a ruthless critique of it, and there is no saving grace. There is no sort of like there are redeeming qualities. It is just the negative, and it's a complete unsubtle, complete bashing you over the head with the negative. And I really appreciate that, especially now, because we don't need that Days of Future Past revisionist Charles Xavier crap.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, just in all honesty, again, the sequel needs to happen. We need to get Christian Bale back and Patrick Bateman for president.
I feel like he'd do it.
I mean, if you gave him that script, I think he would be like, I normally don't like doing sequels to my work, but yeah, this is probably the time.
Yeah.
Maybe I should call up Christian Bale. Anyone know how to get a hold of him?
Well, we did review
try-
that fan film that his sister worked on, so...
That was so weird.
I would recommend that you type in christianbale@gmail.com and then
You're not wrong.
Just get like some random guy who's like, no, this isn't actually Christian Bale. What the fuck?
I'll totally work on your movie, but I'm not the Christian Bale.
Yeah, right? The funny thing
I am an
about,
actor, though.
The funny thing about American Psycho 2 is Patrick Bateman is in it, but they obviously couldn't get Christian Bale back because he avoided that trash. He's just like dressed in his fucking raincoat, and he's got like a mask on and a hat in his apartment as he's like killing a girl, and then Mila Kunis's character as a child kills Patrick Bateman and blah 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 blah. It's pretty stupid from there on out. Anyway, man,
You can just say it never happened, so when you do American Psycho 2.5.
yeah, right. Like, in all honesty, it is such a cash grab sequel. It's hilarious. There's like
Which is weird. This wasn't a big moneymaker, was it?
No, but it got a cult status and kind of, took on a life of its own after its release. After its video release.
Okay, yeah. This was early 2000s, back when like video sales meant something.
I mean, I think they still mean something, but,
Not really.
Okay,
Not really.
Fine. Be a dick.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to. I just am sometimes. I'm sorry.
Yeah. We need like 5 to 10 more minutes. What else is something worth bringing? Oh, setting. This all set in the 80s. Does it look like the 80s?
Not particularly, honestly.
Really?
That's a weird thing I always have
It
to remind
looks like-
myself of like, oh yeah, this is a period piece for some reason.
Well, I mean, I think
Up until you just said that, I forgot.
Really? Okay. I don't know.
Yeah,
think-
I don't know what it like. I don't really know what this specifically should have looked like. If it doesn't look accurate to the '80s, like I wouldn't know, and so I just don't really ever think about it. It doesn't strike me as particularly '80s.
I don't know, like, I mean, how different were the 80s visually, right? Like, you can't do too much. So the hairstyles are different. The suits have, like, the broader shoulders. I mean, you see them use the big-ass fucking cell phones.
Yeah, that's the biggest. That's
Yeah.
okay. That would be the biggest giveaway.
Like, I feel like it's there. It's just subtle and doesn't draw attention to itself too much. Like, it's in the 80s in the ways it needs to be. I feel like the commentary works best because the 80s was the decade of unchecked capitalism. You know, it's the Reagan era, right? Ronald Reagan's on the TV at the end, and they're complaining about him lying on camera. I'm like, well, he's your best fucking friend, so maybe shut your goddamn mouth. Good old Uncle Ronald.
Oh, so true. No, I could see that. I think part of it is just like the kind of thing he's doing is so universal to American masculinity that I just don't see it as a particularly 80s thing. And I don't think it gains anything from being particularly 80s.
Okay.
Like, it's fine. It's just like, I see this in the 90s. I see this in the 2000s. I see this fucking now. I don't really see it as an 80s exclusive.
No, but I think it's an attitude that it certainly didn't start in the 80s, but it took on a life of its own in the 80s. Like, yuppie culture was a thing because of the 80s, and this is
Sure,
satirizing many things, but particularly American yuppie culture. And so I feel like the 80s setting is really important to this, but it does it in a way that's like, I'm not going to say subtle, but it does it in a way that doesn't draw attention to itself. You know, they're doing cocaine in bathrooms. There's a line in the bathroom to do cocaine. Bad cocaine.
Yeah, it doesn't lean into its 80s aesthetic as much as it could have.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, one of my favorite movies is Sing Street, and that one definitely does go for the 80s style. Like, look it, guys, it's the 80s sometimes. But I guess if the book was written in 91, it should then be like a response to what was the decade of excess. So that's something interesting I didn't consider.
Okay. I'm going to talk about something from the book real quick. Shit, I can never remember the name of the goddamn movie. It's another Bret Easton Elias book turned into a film. It's got James Van Der Beek in it.
Oh, Dawson's Creek.
No.
I know.
No. Shut down.
Swing and a miss.
You thought you were so clever.
Swing low.
Is it Less Than Zero?
No, that's the one with Robert Downey Jr.
Oh, okay. Rules of Attraction?
And Ultron.
Yeah, maybe it was Rules of Attraction. That sounds right.
I'm just on Wikipedia now, so...
Yeah, I've got to find it real quick because it's interesting. Yeah, Rules of Attraction. Okay, so that's got James Van Der Beek in it. It came out 2002. This came out in 2000. So in the book, James Van Der Beek's character in Rules of Attraction is Patrick Bateman's brother. They're the Bateman brothers. And in a weird way, if you ever watch Rules of Attraction, I think his name's Sean Bateman. He is even worse than Patrick Bateman in a number of ways. And keeping in mind, in the book, Patrick Bateman performs 5 out of the 7 abortions he's been witness to himself. So just varying levels of fucked upness. But in the book, Sean Bateman shows up. You have no idea how many people I would have killed for that to actually be a thing that happens on film. For Patrick Bateman's brother to show up, because as much as Patrick feels completely emasculated and inferior to all his friends, his brother is even worse. Alright, so here's the thing. Absolutely no one in the movie at no point in the movie is Patrick Bateman actually in Dorsia. In the book, his brother gets him a reservation at Dorsia. It's the most fucked up thing ever, and I would have loved for that to happen, so, I'll wish for something that never will be and never had a chance to be, because obviously they hadn't even started making Rules of Attraction until this. Just something to throw out there. My friend Phil and I used to like to, use American Psycho as kind of our thing of Batman killed people before he became Batman, and Iron Man sucked dick for coke before he became Iron Man because of Less Than Zero. So Batman also killed the Joker. And Dawson was a horrible son of a bitch. So you got your things to throw around there.
Oh, what a story, Ian.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're about at the end here. I don't have a ton else to say. I've gotten all my my licks out there. I sent Steve a link to it. I'll mention it real quick. If you ever want to see a video of me in high school doing part of my presentation on American Psycho, you can go through my videos and just search Sid Part 2 American Psycho. You'll find a gem from almost 10 years ago now. So go check that out if you'd like. Anyway,
God, we're getting old.
Yeah, I'm getting old. I was in high school over 10 years ago now.
Same. Oh my god.
Yeah. Anyway, let's go ahead and go on to ratings. I will give this movie 4.5 out of 5 models' heads frozen in the freezer.
I'll give this movie 5 out of 5 dead Jared Leto's.
Oh, nice one.
I'll give this movie 3.5 out of 5 clean vaginas.
And I will give this movie 4.5 out of 5 business cards.
Nice. Nice. All right, so we're all around the same place. Connor was obviously the lowest on it. Any particular reason?
Because he's a beta male cock!
Oh, there it is. It's because it was the experience. It felt so obligatory to watch it. It's a good movie. I don't deny that, but I feel like I will like it more in time. So
okay, that's fair.
Mostly where it's coming from.
All right, Rasco, what horror movie will we be discussing next week?
Have you guys talked about Christine?
Nope.
We talking about that.
Okay, sounds good. Everyone, thank you very much for watching. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
I am the Exile.
I'm the beta male cuck.
And I'm the Santa.
And we're your geeky gentlemen, and we have to return some videotapes.
Ah!